Let me remove the recording.
Morning, Candace.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, exactly 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you joining us today for our Fillmore Piru Basins Public Review Draft for our GSPs. This is our stakeholder workshop for September 17th, 2021. My name is Kelly Long. I'm the county supervisor and chair of the board. And we have our directors here. We have Director Ed McFadden, representing, yes, he's there. Director Candace Minigan, Director Villa Senior.
Hi, everyone.
Director Pace and Director Kimball. We also have our Executive Director, Tony Emmerich, and our County Council is here too. Plus our wonderful staff. Thank you to United for working with us to ensure that we have our staffing, and then we also have our consultants here today. And just to give you a little background, our Fillmore and Piru Basins have been working since before 2017 on creating the GSA. And then also we were given the task by the state to make sure that we create our GSPs. And the process has been very long, but wonderful. And I really appreciate your time and effort here today to ensure that we get the public feedback and to hear from our stakeholders in regards to these two GSPs, as they are a draft and we will be submitting them to the DWR. And so with that, I'm going to pass it along. My vice chair, Director Ed McFadden, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
No, only to say that this is a big part of the process. It's not the end, but it's an important step and a major step that is a culmination of a lot of work. It's the first part of the rest of our water lives, I guess. So looking forward to getting public feedback.
Thank you. And then I'm going to pass it on to Lisa Ballin. She's our facilitator today.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, and welcome to the workshop, and thank you for attending. We really appreciate your taking your time out of your day. My name is Lisa Ballin. I'm a neutral facilitator with Sacramento State's Consensus and Collaboration Program. And I'll just be guiding us through our workshop today as a facilitator, as Director Long mentioned. Before we begin, I just want to provide a few instructions for anybody that may happen to be new to the Zoom platform. To mute and unmute your microphone, you can click on the microphone icon, which is located on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you have joined us by calling in today and you're not on the Zoom app, you can press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And we just ask that everybody keeps their audio muted when you're not speaking. Similarly, to turn your video on and off, you simply click the camera icon, which is located on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We welcome to keep your video on, but if you're having trouble with the connection, you might want to try turning that off. Sometimes that helps. If you do want to ask a question or make a comment during the workshop, we ask that you raise your virtual hand, and you can do this by clicking the reaction button, which should be on the bottom of your screen towards the right, and then you click raise hand. And then when you're finished making your comment, you can lower the hand. If you don't see the reactions button, you may need to click the 3 dots that say more, and then you'll find the reactions. Then on some versions of Zoom, you may need to click the participants icon on the bottom of your screen, and then you can hover over your name and see the raised hand option. If you have any technical issues during the meeting, please feel free to send a chat to Ibarra, and the chat feature is also on the bottom of the screen. I thought maybe since we have kind of a small group, it would be nice for us to get a sense of who's in the room. So I thought I would invite everybody to introduce yourselves. so we can get a sense of who you are. Feel free to let us know if you're a resident, which basin you're in, if you're representing an agency and or organization. You're welcome to share that information with us as well. So I'll just run down the list of attendees as, one more item. If somebody is on the phone and they have an option to rename themselves with their name by going to the participants, hovering over your name and then rename, that would be great, just so I don't have to call on anybody by their phone number. All right, so super. Let's see who we have with us today. We've already, Chair Long has already introduced the board and the staff, so I'll just run through participants that we have here today. Okay, so we have Steve Zimmer.
I have followed the GSA from the beginning.
Super, thank you, welcome. Margie?
Can't get this stupid thing to work.
Oh, we hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm lost here. I can't get anything but this basic screen.
Oh, that's okay. We hear you. If you want to just introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Margie Bartels. I'm a certified organic Valencia orange grower in Bardsdale.
Welcome. Okay, then we have a number 408 area code. I'll come back to you if you're able to unmute a little later. Then a number that ends in 0789.
That's Matthew Freeman with the Camillus Ranch, Piru.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Barney Caudill. Okay, I'll come back to you if you're able to unmute later. Bob Morris.
Yeah, Bob Morris. I Fillmore Basin, and on the board of the Fillmore Basin Pumpers.
Welcome. Let me see if I missed anybody. Brian Bondi.
Good morning, Brian Bondi. I'm a hydrogeologist and I'm assisting the Fillmore and Piru Basin Pumpers Association. Thank you.
Welcome, thank you. Carol Farnoff.
I represent Global Ag in the Piru Basin and also a director on the Piru board.
Welcome, thank you. Baron Barrera.
Hi, I'm an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Super, thank you. Debbie Jackson.
Hello, Fillmore Basin, and my family farms avocados and citrus.
Super, welcome. Eric.
He left a message in the chat.
Oh, yes, okay. Welcome, Eric. Is in the small avocado grower in the Fillmore Basin. Thank you, Eva. Erin Wilson-Olgan.
Hello, I'm Erin Wilson. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for CDFW Habitat Conservation Planning.
Welcome. Thank you. Gilead Werman.
Hi, I'm Gilad Werman, actually. I'm an independent consultant, and by strange happenstance, also a former grad student with Christian Broderick.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. Welcome. Okay, let's see. Jeffrey Steinberg.
I'm a grower in the Fillmore area.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer Nipper.
I work as a consultant.
Thank you. Jim Vandewater.
Hi, this is Jim Vandewater. I'm a consultant.
Welcome. M. Shoemaker.
I'm Miles
Same
Shoemaker.
Melissa.
I'm the irrigation manager with the Luminaire Company.
Thank you. Welcome. Richard Tate.
Yes, I'm represent a company farming in the Piru Basin, and I'm on the board of directors of the Piru Basin Pumpers Association.
Welcome. Robin Madrid.
Yes, good morning. I'm Robin Madrid. I'm the Northern Lands Program Supervisor for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Welcome. Scott Klittich.
Scott Klittich, Ottawa and Sons Nursery. I have a nursery here in Piru area.
Welcome. Steve Slack.
Yeah, again, my name is Steve Slack. I work for California Department of Fish and Wildlife in the ABCON and Planning Department. I've been kind of involved in this from the beginning, so thanks for inviting everybody.
Thank you. S. Zimmer.
I believe we already introduced him earlier, Lisa.
Oh,
Steve
okay,
Zimmer.
sorry.
Yeah,
Thanks, sir.
I was impressed too.
Thanks. Yeah, the names are popping around a little bit. Tim Dillingham.
Hi, I'm Tim Dillingham. I'm the Lands Program Supervisor for the southern part of the region for Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Welcome. Is there anybody I missed or who was muted before that would like to introduce themselves? Feel free to just unmute. Okay, super. Thank you all. That's really helpful. It's great to see the attendance that we have today. Okay, so I'd like to just review the agenda and then we'll get rolling with it. Tony, if you stop your share, I might be able to pop it up on the screen real quickly. Okay. Okay, so that should be on your screen now. Okay, so what I want to stress is that the main purpose of today's workshop is really to provide you with an overview of the draft GSP's conclusions, kind of the bigger picture overview of the document, and give you an opportunity to ask your questions about the GSP documents before you submit your official comments on the documents. So the overview and this first Q&A session that we have are intended to cover kind of the basic conclusions of the documents. I just want to point out that questions raised during this session and anything placed in the chat box during the entire workshop will not be considered formal comments on the GSP. Although we prefer that comments are submitted in writing, we do, however, have some time during today's workshop for anybody who wants to submit formal comments orally today. So just that will be a separate session and we'll clearly designate that. We just want to be clear about when we're kind of discussing and when we're having formal comments. And I will be later on in the agenda showing you how to submit your comments online via the form. Okay, so I also want to point out that the way we've structured the agenda is that for the first session to be kind of a bigger picture overview and some general questions and answers. But we have designated some time at the end of the meeting for technical questions. So if a question comes up during the Q&A period after the presentation that requires a little more in-depth response or it's kind of highly detailed on a technical matter, we might ask if we can push that to the end and that those who are interested to stay for that more detailed discussion can stay for that. So I will stop sharing and just ask quickly if anybody has any questions on the agenda before we get into our presentation. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands. One other item, actually, before we get into the presentation is that we had a local loss and I believe there was a request for a moment of silence to honor that. So Chair Long, I don't know if you wanted to lead that. Okay, why don't we just take?
Yes,
why don't
I
we
will
just
be
take-
closing.
sorry.
We'll be closing in memory of Stacy Ritchie, niece to Councilmember Villasenor, and then also with the loss of Councilmember from Fillmore, Ari Larson today. We heard that her passing, and so for both of them, we close in memory of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Before I turn it over to Tony for the presentation, I just also want to note that we're going to try to get through the entire presentation and then open up for questions. So if you could hold your comments until then in terms of raising your hand. If you do put something in the chat box, just let us know what your comment pertains to so that when we get to the end, we'll have some context for that comment. If there's really something burning that you need a response to, feel free to, raise your hand and let you know. Tony, do you want to introduce kind of your staff on the consultant team before the presentation? And perhaps we can get an introduction of United staff as well.
Sure, that's fine. Again, hello everyone, good morning. I'm Tony Morgan with Daniel B. Stevens and Associates, and our consulting team was selected to assist this GSA in preparing the GSP documents for both the Fillmore and Piru Basin. With me today is Patrick O'Connell. There we go. And Christian Broderick's here to help us with our biological / ecosystem kinds of things. And Dan Detmer from United is here. You're not part of our team technically, but yes, you are, in helping us get the GSPs done. So thank you, Lisa. And Tony Emmert's there, who we rely on heavily for guidance and words of wisdom as the executive director. Thanks, Lisa.
So with this, I would like to suggest that we get started, noting the time right now that we go over the draft GSP review.
Yeah, so turning it over to you, Tony.
All right.
Thank you.
So hopefully you are seeing a screen share.
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay, very good. Very good. Good morning, everyone, again. Hopefully your coffee cups are full. We're going to fly through these early portion of the agenda today. This is an overview section. You all had an opportunity to take a look at the GSP documents. They've been available in a variety of formats. So let's just get going and we'll deal with some questions as they come up. So why are we doing these plans? Just a quick backup for us. The Groundwater Sustainability Act came effective in January 2015, and basins that were assigned a high or medium priority ranking have until January 2022 to file your groundwater sustainability plan with DWR. That's California Department of Water Resources. So we have high priority for Fillmore and Piru basins, largely the result of their heavy reliance on groundwater. Okay. So if we didn't do these plans, what could possibly happen if the local agencies don't take control of the groundwater situation in their basins? Then the state of California has the authority to come in and take over management of the basins of water resources. And that's not something that they want to do. And it's not something that we as the GSA or the consulting team want to have happen either. So we're working diligently to give them a document that they will accept. So where are the Fillmore and Piru basins? So here's a general map showing the Piru Basin here on the right side of the map, Fillmore on the left side. You can see the LA Ventura County line here. And I just highlighted some geographic areas to get you oriented. There's Piru, Fillmore here, Santa Paula off to the west end of the basins. So it's these two basins that we are talking about today for these GSPs. So some mission statement type language here. It focuses on locally tailored management, and that's something that this board elected to form itself and to move forward with the GSP process. And so the directors, in my opinion, have worked very diligently to address the language there that you see in sort of this orangish colored font there, to protect the resources and to protect it for a variety of beneficial users in each of the basins. So basic guidelines here when we're developing GSPs, it's important to remember that these are adaptive documents, okay? You're gonna prepare a document. In 5 years, you're gonna be asked to refresh that document, update it, what worked, what didn't work, what new conditions have you encountered in the past 5 years that the GSA feels that it needs to address. But in addition, annually, you're gonna submit a status report or a progress report, if you want to think of it that way, to the Department of Water Resources that says, hey, here's what's going on in our basin. Here's what the conditions look like in a snapshot at this point in time. We don't address water rights. That's specifically stated in Sigma. We're not addressing water rights. We also don't have to correct past impacts unless they create unsustainable conditions. And to that end, the regulations indicate that we can use January 2015 as a baseline if we so desire. Okay, but they don't want you to let the conditions to get worse than the January 2015, if at all possible. Okay, a big thing that we have to keep in mind is we're not required to restore or to enhance or to achieve some past groundwater conditions. In the early days of Sigma implementation, folks were concerned that they're going to have to recreate groundwater conditions, for example, that occurred in 1850. Well, number one, we're not exactly sure what those were in 1850, but secondly, that's not something that is a part of the Sigma. We don't have to go back and recreate past groundwater conditions, okay? The board has elected to manage these basins together, and they passed a resolution on that a few meetings ago. So there's a lot of similarities in the hydrology between the basins. They're not identical, but the land use is very similar, and so it makes sense to manage these basins together. So for GSP, they're organized in a simple fashion. There's a separate GSP for each basin. The documents are organized, the GSP documents, that is, are organized per the recommended GSP outline from DWR. We elected to keep the organization consistent with their recommendations to make it easier for them to find the information that they think they need in the review process. So let's not make it difficult for them where they have to hunt through the document to find key information. The GSP documents, and there's one for each basin here, are designed to address those items specifically required by DWR and are written to the extent possible for the stakeholder. We tried to, where possible, minimize the technical jargon. Okay. To accompany the GSPs, there are a series of appendices that are divided into 2 volumes merely for convenience because of the size of the appendices. These cover both basins and contain much more technical information that support the language in the GSPs. Okay, each GSP is about 250 pages. The technical appendices are about 2,100 pages or so. So we've got approximately 2,600 pages of documents here for you to read and enjoy. Today, we're obviously not going to be able to go page by page through all of these, so we're hitting the highlights. You'll have plenty of time to review these documents if you wish to drill down into a specific topic and get a little more information. So let's talk about GSP findings at a glance. So here's the GSP summary in 2 minutes. Okay, both basins are sustainable. You'll see that we have a lot of no's here for sustainable management criteria, and we'll define those a little bit more in a bit. In the basin, we're not talking about any pumping reductions needed to achieve sustainability. We're not anticipating any water supply wells to go dry, even with future climate change factored into it. There are some impacts to GDEs at the Fillmore-Piru Basin boundary that are proposed to be mitigated, and you've seen that information in the GSPs as well as the technical appendices. The GSA is going to consider some optional projects to potentially further enhance the basin, and there's some data gaps with the shallow aquifers that the agency intends to address using their existing DWR grant monies by installing a few extra monitoring wells in the basins. So that's the GSP findings at a glance. So one of the big things that we have to do in a GSP is to set the basin setting or establish the basin setting. And many times those of us from the technical side will think of the basin setting as being the geologic conditions or the hydrogeologic conditions, but DWR's definition of setting is much broader. And so they want to see things like where are the disadvantaged communities, the DACs, where are they? And so you'll see the maps here from the GSP that cover Piru and Fillmore basins. Where are those disadvantaged communities? By the way, the little blue boxes that you see down in the corner of the slides, those indicate some of the GSP sections and or technical appendices that talk about whatever the topic is for that particular slide. So setting also includes land use. In this series of maps right here, green shades cover agricultural land use. It also branches over into groundwater dependent ecosystems. And for these two basins, we have three primary areas that are deemed the most important for the groundwater dependent ecosystems. There's the Del Valle here on the eastern end of the Piru Basin, the Cienega area right here that sort of straddles the Fillmore-Piru Basin boundary, and then the East Grove area on the west end of the Fillmore Basin. So precipitation is part of your basin setting as well. And so I thought it would be interesting for stakeholders to see, here's the plots for each year of the precipitation for the Piru Basin in the top graph and the Fillmore Basin in the lower graph. They're similar, they're not identical. Some quick observations you can see is that we have a lot of years where we're below average. The average precipitation is the sort of dashed black line right there and that you see. And the blue dashed line is the 5-year moving average. It's just to give you a little smooth perspective of what's going on with the precipitation. So you see we have periods where we have multiple years where we're well below average, followed by years where we have heavy precipitation. And it's those years that are above average, those heavy precipitation years, that are key to the hydrology of these basins. So let's take this data set a little bit further. You'll notice how it goes all the way out to 2096. Obviously, we don't have water level data out into the future. So we needed to project out for the purposes of Sigma to assess what the future impacts might be from climate change or just the normal drought, wet, cyclic periods that we typically experience in these basins. And so here's the Piru Basin, and we have the precipitation pattern here that was used in the GSP. And what was done is we picked a period of the historical precipitation record, duplicated it, and appended it onto the end of our current timeline. So we took a period and added it onto the end of the timeline here, then adjusted the precipitation patterns based on the climate change factors offered by DWR in one of their future climate scenarios. And those scenarios are, they don't tell you how much precipitation is going to occur in a particular year, but they tell you the change factor. That's the CF, change factor, that's associated with it. So they may say, oh, for this year, it's going to be plus 1%. Next year, it might be minus 3%, whatever that number is. We then modified that historical record by applying the change factor to it. So that's how these future numbers were developed for precipitation. Now, One thing I want to caution people is that this is not predictive going into the future. So if we were to look at, let's pick a year, here's 2046. So let's pick that year. We are not saying by this graph that in 2046, we're going to get 40 inches of rain. That's not what this chart should be used to do. What we're developing is a series of wet and dry cycles that we're evaluating how the basin responds and how that affects the sustainability into the future. And so when we do these kinds of analyses, we see things that help us understand how the basin operates. And so the brown line right here that you see, I'm kind of walking along with the cursor, that's what's called the cumulative departure from mean. Kind of a complicated title, but what is it really telling us? So if the brown line is going down, that means our precipitation is less than average that year. So every year it's less than average. So here, that line keeps going down, 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 down. When we get a year that's above average, it comes up a little bit. When we get multiple years, we get a bump in it. So what we use this for, the hydrogeologists look at this and we look for trends in the data. So we see, oh, look, here's a period when things were kind of wetter than average, drier than average, wetter than average. So we see these big long-term cycles, and in those long-term cycles, we have smaller ones that are multi-year. So here we have a wet period in the middle of the dry period. Here's a wet year, here's a wet cycle, there's a wetter cycle, and we move back into a nice wet cycle there. So you don't have to memorize this. There's no quiz or anything on this. This is just showing you the trends that allow us to talk about the basin setting in a little more detail. So that's Piru Basin. And let's see, here is, or excuse me, that was, yeah, just additional information there. So let's just keep going, considering our time. So there's Fillmore Basin. I'm not going to elaborate and go through this one in detail, but you can see the trend is very similar. Okay, so we need to talk about, so we've simulated what we think precipitation might look like into the future. So what does that really mean for water levels? And so Patrick's going to take us through a couple of the next slides here and talk about water levels.
Yeah,
so
thanks, Tony. Hello, everyone. So Tony talked about the long-term precipitation records we use to develop the GSP. And on this slide, what we're trying to do is relate that to the groundwater levels throughout the basin. So we see in the center is a map of both the basins with the dots representing some wells that have the longest groundwater level records going back to even the 1920s. And just by looking at these scattered across the border of the figure, top, left, bottom, and the right, you see that there are dips at times, but they essentially recover and kind of, I guess, flatten out. And when you see that, yeah, right where Tony's pointing, those are like basin full conditions, as we call them.
Oh, sorry, heavy finger.
No animations on this one, yeah. But you do see drops during the droughts. And if you look over to the right, you see a series of 3 kind of orangish bars. And so the bottom 3 graphs are some of these very long-term groundwater level records we have in the Piru Basin. And above it, you see the historical precip record. And just for your information, when Tony was talking about that projected timeline, we used the historical equivalent and adjusted with climate factors. And that's what we're looking at here, is really just observed historical conditions. And you can see that, Tony, if you could point at that graph second to the bottom, yes, that one. You can see that there was a large dip, a very long drought, about 25, 30 years from the mid 40s to the end of the 60s. You can see what the groundwater levels did. But of course, as soon as we got some wet years, they rebounded, topped out. And we've had a series of couple more droughts, late 80s. And I'm sure everybody remembers the 2012, 2016 drought to the way right. So this is just demonstrating that basin does experience prolonged droughts, but does recover. In the next slide, we'll talk about the water budgets. Next, so DWR requires 3 water budgets, one for historical period, which you see here with the pie charts, one for current and projected. I'll talk about those later, but right now let's just look at the historic. This is where we have the best information available from 1988 to 2015 with the groundwater model that United developed. And takeaway message here is just look at the kind of yellowish brownish colors to the left. Those are different components that take water out of the groundwater basin, such as pumping from wells or just natural groundwater flow out of the basin. And then you have the blue colors on the right, which are inflows. So at the top here, Piru, a lot of water flows in as stream percolation from like Piru and Santa Clara River and such. Down below, Fillmore gets a lot of water from Piru. But takeaway message is if the blue and the brownish colors kind of balance out, that means that you have a pretty much a sustainable basin, at least in the classical sense of a safe yield analysis, which we'll talk more about why Sigma has additional considerations. But so if you look here, there's a slight deficit, about 1,500 to 2,000 acre feet per year on average in both basins, but that's just because we're in a current drought. Tony, if you click the next slide, or yes. So here we're looking at just the most recent 5 or about 4 years, and you see there's more blue slices than the brown, and the change in storage, which is shown in the white slices, are actually positive. So we're in a period of recovery right now. Although this is only through 2019. Currently, we're having some dry years, but that's why it's important to look at the long term. So if you click once more, Tony. Thank you. So like Tony mentioned, we looked at a very long projected future. So for the DWR requires a 50-year period in the future. And based on that, even with a very long drought period, the basin does seem to balance out, and you only have a couple hundred acre feet difference, which is really in the noise of the error of the model. And this is what we use to develop the sustainable yield. I'll hand it back to you, Tony.
Thanks, Patrick. So this is the approach that we would classically use in assessing whether a basin is in balance, and it's helpful to take a look at these kinds of numbers. Again, these are averaged annual groundwater budgets, and so we've got a lot of things schmoozed together to come up with those things. But DWR went farther when they decided if you're going to decide a basin is sustainable, they gave you other criteria, and this is just a snapshot of the language that comes out of the regulations. And so they asked us to look at chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Okay, they looked at significant and unreasonable reductions of groundwater storage, significant and unreasonable seawater intrusion, significant and unreasonable degraded water quality, okay, significant and unreasonable land subsidence, and depletions of interconnected surface waters that have significant and unreasonable impacts. Okay, so that's a lot more detail and a lot different approach to assessing whether a basin is sustainable or not. And so you look at that, and there's a lot of things going on in those simple little definitions right there. And so here's a suite of criteria down the left-hand side of this table. Okay. And the board and the stakeholders wrestled with this table for several months, trying to come up with a way to balance everything and present a convincing case to DWR that we understand our basin and that we can get it into a sustainable condition. And so there's lots of information to go through here. So let's just run through these just so you know. It's all explained in the various GSPs and or technical appendices, but let's just talk through it real quickly. Undesirable results. What's that column mean? That means what's the bad thing that you're trying to avoid? What you're trying to prevent from happening. Okay, so for example, let's just look at storage. So the bad thing we don't want to happen is to have inadequate groundwater storage that we can't last through a multi-year drought without groundwater extraction limitations. Okay, that's the bad thing we want to avoid. Your metric means, how am I going to measure that? Well, we're going to look at the groundwater elevations to calculate storage. That's a pretty common way to do that. Okay, the MT is a minimum threshold. That's the value where those significant and unreasonable results, those bad things that we're trying to avoid, are expected to occur. So the board has settled on this definition of what the MT would be. Water level declines below the base of the well screens in more than 25% of the representative wells in the basin. On the flip side of that coin, there's an MO, a measurable objective. What are the desired objectives for this particular criteria? Think of it as what would be your desired future conditions? What would you like for it to be? And so we would like to have water levels at the 2011 high water level. And so Patrick showed in a couple slides ago that the water levels in many hydrographs come up and they sort of plateau out. And so that plateau is about at the 2011 high water level. And then we have a final column here for comments. It's just a summary of additional information that could be used. Okay, so this table, while it looks relatively simple, was the point of discussion for several months and many board meetings and stakeholder sessions trying to refine how we would like to see this go. So let's run through these really quickly. Let's take the easy one first. Seawater intrusion, it's not applicable. We're too far from the coast. Check the box, move on. We don't have to set any criteria or anything for that. We talked about water levels or water elevations and representative wells. And so here's the representative wells that are proposed to be used. And you'll see there's a dot for a well right there. And then there are two numbers with it. Those two numbers are explained up here. The top one is the 2011 groundwater elevation. Okay, that's where we would like for it to be. The bottom of the well screen where the MT would kick in is the bottom number. So where we'd like for it to be and where the bottom of the well screen actually is set for each of these wells. And it's different for every well, of course. So again, additional information on this is up there. One of the takeaways for this particular thing is that no water supply wells are projected to go dry, even with future climate change. We don't see that. And we used United's groundwater model to help us determine what those elevations would look like, those groundwater elevations would look like going forward in time. So this is a really busy set of graphs for you. This is groundwater storage. And so each one of these bars in here is a year, and each one of those bars has different colors that you can't differentiate at this scale. The point being is that if we took all of these colored bars, averaged them up and put them in a pie chart, you would see that graph that Patrick showed to you a few slides ago. It's the same information, just presented in a different way. And we have it in a different way so that we can see how groundwater storage fluctuates over time. And our message here is that even when we have big droughts, we come back out of it. Our storage recovers. That's totally expected because if you remember, we talked about the groundwater elevations coming back during wet periods. So we have dry periods, it goes down, storage is depleted, wet periods, groundwater levels come back up, storage is replenished. So that's the story here. No long-term decline in groundwater storage evidenced in these data sets. Water quality degradation is there. This is an interesting one in that the GSA doesn't have any authority over water quality. Other people do, like the regional board or even the county of Ventura. So others have jurisdiction over water quality, but not this agency. So what the agency is elected to do is they're going to continue to monitor the several wells that they have in the basin where they're currently having ongoing monitoring, and that's conducted largely by United, but also a little bit by the county of Ventura. Okay. If a problem is identified, then they'll work with the appropriate regulatory agency to mitigate that issue. But this GSA I'm talking about don't have the authority over water quality to require someone to stop or whatever an action. That's someone else to do that. So the map on the screen right here is just an example of several you'll see in the technical appendices to the GSP. It's talking about trends in various water quality parameters. This one is particular TDS, total dissolved solids, a general measure of water quality in the basin. And so it shows you where it's in red if the trend looks to be increasing, green if it's decreasing, and sort of a gray if it's remaining relatively steady. So you can see a whole series of graphs in the GSPs and other things. So we're not necessarily looking for man-made contamination sites in these basins. There's no major ones in the two basins. We do have an issue of chlorides coming in from the Santa Clarita Valley water treatment facilities upstream. So that would be off to the east here of the Piru Basin, and there is impact of chlorides in the eastern part of the Piru Basin. So that's being watched, but again, that's being handled by another agency, the regional board. And this agency has the ability to input to those decisions that are made by that board. Okay, we're mostly worried about the naturally occurring conditions such as sulfate, boron, TDS, et cetera, and how those compare to the basin plan goals established by DWR or LA Regional Board, sorry. Groundwater subsidence. There's no historical evidence of subsidence in the basins, no anecdotal data saying, you know, well casings are sticking up out of the ground or bridges are being displaced, those kinds of things that you would classically see. Groundwater levels are not expected to decline to elevations that would promote subsidence in the future. That's again, looking through the groundwater model data that United provided and checking that against where the elevation would need to be. And we do see an interesting thing in the Piru Basin, and we chose to put that map in today's presentation. So you see this green area right here. This green area is representing groundwater elevation rise. And it was during the period when United was supplying supplemental water to the basin. And so we would call this elastic rebound, and not something that we're particularly concerned about in the basin, but it's quite interesting to see that the basin elevation did go up a little bit. You can see the approximate values down here. This is all satellite derived data. It comes from the INSAR satellite program, and DWR has committed to providing this data to the GSAs at no cost for the next few years. We don't know, beyond the quote few years what that means, but at least for the near term, it's expected to be provided to us. So this is a big help when you're trying to assess and monitor what's going on with subsidence in your basins. We should talk about surface water depletions as well. These are surface water depletions due to groundwater extractions. And we use the groundwater model developed by United to simulate what happens to water levels if the wells within about 1 mile of the Santa Clara River were to stop pumping. That's not necessarily a realistic assumption or a scenario, but we wanted to assess the impact of pumping on surface water depletion. So the graphs here show the change in surface water flow at this particular site, which is near the rising water at the Cienega GDEs, right at the Fillmore-Piru boundary line. So with and without pumping. And so we see here's the historical, here's the projected future in sort of the brown dots there, and some averages for these two periods. And so the overarching conclusion there is that the future doesn't look much different than the past. If you look at the averages or the means, et cetera, there's not a whole lot of variation. And if you just visually look at the graphs, you can see that most of these dots fall within a range going from 10 CFS to maybe 3 CFS, something like that. And that holds for pretty much both these forward-looking and historical perspectives on surface water depletion. So it doesn't look like the future is going to be much different than what the past was, and that was a big revelation, and a lot of time was spent discussing that with stakeholders and the board. So we did identify a few data gaps as we went through the GSP development process, and the most probably significant of those is the lack of shallow groundwater monitoring data, and we proposed some additional monitoring wells to be installed. And so that's sort of the blue circles you see sprinkled around the basins, areas where we don't have shallow groundwater level data. And we also thought that one nested well to check on vertical groundwater gradients would be appropriate for the west end of the Fillmore Basin area. So this program of shallow monitoring wells and a nested well is going to be funded by the existing grant that the agency has. So the funds for that are all established and are ready to go. And so that program will be kicking off in the not too distant future. So there are projects and management actions proposed in each of the GSPs, and I've got them sort of color coded here based on those that the agency says we're going to do this, and those that they're going to consider doing those, and those are more discretionary, if you will. So you remember we talked a little bit earlier about developing a plan to mitigate impacts to GDE vegetation in the Cienega area. And so that's part of the projects and management actions proposed for going forward, is to actually develop that mitigation plan for what's going to be happening there. And the general concept is that the GSA would supply supplemental groundwater to the Cienega Springs restoration site and allow those professionals there to dictate how that water is best used to get the most benefit for the restoration program that's going on there. In addition, it would be helpful to have shallow groundwater information at the Cienega Springs facility. And so they proposed to construct shallow monitoring wells there using the existing grant monies that they've already have. That provides a benefit both to the GSA, so they know what's going on with shallow groundwaters, but also to the Cienega Springs project as well. And then we just mentioned there are other shallow monitoring wells to be constructed around the basins to fill those data gaps. So these three are the ones that are more firmly developed. Again, we still have to develop the mitigation plan for the Cienega Springs project, put in the details, develop the whens and how muches and all that kind of stuff. We've got ideas, but we haven't fleshed those out totally yet. The discretionary items are sort of 4 through 7. There's been conversations in the past by stakeholders and directors about establishing a discretionary fund to purchase supplemental waters whenever those become available. Occasionally, DWR during wet periods has too much water in the reservoirs in Northern California, and they look to transfer those at cost to other agencies that are state water contract holders. So that's United for our particular area. And so it's been United that's brought in those waters historically. And so the idea was, well, maybe this agency would establish a fund that could be used by United to purchase additional water to top off the basins, if you will. That's not something that happens every year. That's sporadically. It's, maybe every 7 to 10 years that supplemental water becomes available. That's both bad in that it's infrequent, but it's also good that it gives you time in between each of those events to collect and amass amount of money that could buy you a significant amount of water. Okay, there was discussions of augmenting the water quality monitoring network to fill some data gaps, and that could be partially accomplished by adding those monitoring wells that are constructed up under, let's say, items 2 and 3 above to the water quality monitoring network to get a little more information on the shallow aquifers. So there's a discussion of that, and there'd be more, more debate about cost benefit versus not doing anything for this program. We've had discussions of creating a non-native vegetation removal program. Okay, details to be discussed. That's why it says consider over here. And then also consider performing a subsidence infrastructure vulnerability evaluation. So taking a look at those gravity fed systems in the city of Fillmore and or the town of Piru, for example, and assessing what kind of subsidence would cause problems for their gravity feed system, but also looking at bridges and other kinds of critical infrastructure. So those are the suite of 7 projects that are currently listed in the GSPs. So where are we at right now? So we're at a point where the public review draft GSPs are out on the street, available. They've been out for a few weeks now, and hopefully everyone has had a chance to thumb through them. I realize the page count is large. I apologize, but there's a lot of things that DWR asked for, and we have to try to satisfy DWR. So you get a lot of information there. So these GSPs will be updated based on the stakeholder review comments that we receive. So, and Lisa talked earlier about how to do that. And I think we're going to go over that again later. Okay. The draft final GSP will be brought back to the board of directors for their consideration for adoption in December. And then the DWR requires that the GSPs be filed with them by the end of January. So this is the big heavy lift, is to getting your GSPs done and submitted to DWR, but that doesn't mean you're done. There are other things that are going to continue forward into the future. And so we just made up an example chart here of what needs to done. So there are annual reports every year. The agency must submit an annual report advising the DWR what's going on in your basin, what's working, what's not working, that kind of thing. Every 5 years, you update your GSP. Okay. And so the project and management actions we just reviewed will be talked about and reviewed. And I just put in some arbitrary timelines that I thought seemed appropriate from my perspective. The board is free to adjust and move those around as they feel are appropriate. And then there's always the administrative issues, you know, water quality monitoring and flow monitoring is going to continue. There's going to be a data management component to all of this. There's going to be information collected, water level data, pumping data that's going to be supplied, and those all have to be QA/QC put into the database, monitored, and that kind of thing. That's the basic information that you're going to use to prepare annual reports, etc. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I guess we're going to move to Q&A session. Lisa, is that correct?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Tony, for the presentation. I'd like to open it up now for anybody who has questions about the documents, about the presentation. As a reminder, as mentioned before, this time is just an informal question and answer period. It's not a formal comment period. And feel free to put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand. Chair Long, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to say, start off by thanking everyone for all the work that's been put in on this. I personally don't have any questions as right now because we have been reviewing this at every board meeting, the actions that are going forward, and just wanted to say thank you to the directors for your continued dedication on this, and also the community members for sharing information and walking through this process with us, because we have formed where we are with all that feedback from everybody. And I just wanted to say thank you very much. So with that, I'm showing you how to raise your hand and ask questions, or you can chat. So I'll hand that back over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Super, thank you. And we do have a question in the chat box from Debbie Jackson. How does the 2011 water level compare to the 2015 water level?
I should unmute. Most famous words we hear every day. You're muted. The 2011 levels are basically what we call the basin full condition. And so I keep pointing to this graph right here. We could use any of these really for that. So in a well by well situation, the 2015 low is anywhere from 40 to maybe 80 feet lower than the 2011 value. Patrick or Dan Detmer, do you have any further refinement of that number? It depends on which well you look at and where you're at in the basin.
I would say just at a high level in Piru, the more east you go, the bigger the difference. You could even have 100 feet difference.
Okay.
I think you said 80 about.
Yeah.
And then we go to the west end, it could be as small as 20. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. The near the basin boundary, those differentials are much less, and the Bardstown is much more stable as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Mennigan?
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Tony, for the presentation, and also for accommodating schedules on the workshop. For some folks might be aware, last week, Thursday, the Santa Clara River Steelhead Coalition had their quarterly meeting, and they asked all the environmental representatives to do an update on how the GSP development process is going. And so one concern that I have raised in the past is that we've only included the CESP Cienega GDE in the sustainable management criteria table for groundwater elevation and surface water depletion. And I suppose I'm going to call on Bruce Orr and Christian to explain, because one of the concerns that was raised at the Steelhead Coalition meeting is that at the East Grove, there is a spring-fed creek called Lost Creek, and that that is potential over summer rearing habitat for Southern California steelhead, which is a federally endangered species. And so it's just why, as much as it's been identified as a GDE, why have we not developed sustainable management criteria or minimum threshold for that GDE specifically? I think because that's a concern for stakeholders, if Stillwater as the GDE consultant can provide a little bit more explanation for folks on the line as to why not. That'd be helpful to inform comments moving forward.
I think I can address part of that. I'll let Bruce address the Lost Creek part. One of the reasons we didn't focus on the East Grove is because the East Grove has been relatively resilient, even during the recent 2000 teens drought. The East Grove continued to have areas of flowing surface, interconnected surface water, and the riparian vegetation was relatively robust. The groundwater stayed shallow enough, so it survived through that long drought. In contrast with the Cienega area, where the groundwater dropped sufficiently that a lot of the riparian vegetation has died. And so that was why we focused on the Cienega rather than the East Grove.
Yeah, I guess to just chime in. So, Christian explained the general rationale. We were the ones that raised the issue of Lost Creek and its identification there. One of the challenges in doing something beyond just exploring it a bit further is the lack of good data. To my knowledge, there were some earlier fish surveys done, I think 2015, 2016, that did not pick up presence of steelhead there, but we recognize that it's been discussed locally as a potential rearing habitat area. So as Christian said, our thought was East Grove is in good shape. The criteria that are used to sort of track what happens in East Grove should, we feel, maintain sort of recent conditions in Lost Creek. And maybe I can leave it at that. Tony, I don't know if there's anything else you want to.
One thing I was going to add on top of that is we identified that East Grove area as one of our data gaps. So that is one of the areas that we are doing increased monitoring as a first step. And it very well may be that in the future we can establish better parameters there. But being that weathered the most severe 5-year drought in recent history here, and we are already looking at increased monitoring there. that is an acknowledged data gap. It's acknowledged as an important location, and we're investing the multiple completion well to gather as much information there as possible. So that is a very important area, but the first acknowledged need is better information.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions that they'd like to ask about either GSP, the presentation? Feel free to raise your hand or put something in the comment box. You did such a good job, Tony, explaining it. No questions.
We were flying through it, so I'm hitting the very highest highlights.
Hi, this is Christina Villasenor. Yes, I do have a question. And also, I just want to thank you, Tony, for, again, all of the work that you and your team have done to put this together. And I always appreciate how you explain things in a layman's term that allows myself as a non-engineer regular resident to understand. Well, I have a question that it's sort of been in the back of my mind, and I thought this is a good time to bring it up for other stakeholders as well. And that's about the application of climate change data, what we know to the charts and to that 70-year forward looking. If you can explain it a little bit more, because I could understand someone seeing it and saying, okay, you've applied climate change to this model, but what did that consist of when you said you applied climate change? And, did you look at different models and was the most severe, I guess you could say, one used, and that sort of thing? So if I could just get a little bit more information on that,
Okay,
that would be great.
Okay, sure. So there are multiple climate change models out there, and it seems like monthly more of them come out by some academic somewhere that did a study and comes up with another climate change model. And so rather than spend time having the GSA sponsor us to go through and review all those, we relied on the analysis that DWR did. They evaluated a bunch of climate change modeling results out there and offered up a set of those that they suggested that we look at. And we were free to not do those, to use something else if we felt it was more important or more appropriate, maybe that's a better word for it, to use. But we elected to use what they called the 2070 climate change factor model. It's a medium severe climate change model. There are ones that are less severe, but our approach was, let's run the severe one first. And if we can determine that we have sustainable conditions, well, we don't need to worry about running those that are less severe. Okay, we've already proven that the basins could be sustainable with a severe climate change scenario. We don't need to run it with the lesser scenarios. So that was the general approach. And so we elected the climate change as our template. So what that means is they being DWR, give you changes. It's climate change factors. So they don't tell you how much precipitation, for example, is going to fall in 2046, but they tell you based on the model, they think it's going to be 2% less or 3% more or whatever the number is. And then what we had to do was to say, okay, well, what do we think the precipitation might look like in 2046? Because we had to have something to apply the change factor to. So we went back and looked at the historical record, picked a time frame that we thought covered big droughts, big wet periods, and all lengths and severities of both of those in between. Basically copied that out of the historical record, added it onto the end of our current record, and then applied the change factors on top of that. That was the basic way to do it. And we debated on what series of years to use to copy and replicate on the end of the current record. And we worked with folks in the Mound Basin as well, because we wanted to have a reasonably consistent future scenario that applied to the entire watershed. So we got Fillmore, Piru, Santa Paula is going to fall in there by default, and the Mound Basin. So that was the purpose. And we had a couple, 3 meetings to talk about what years. United's hydrologists did a bunch of work helping synthesize that data and getting it in a form for everybody to look at quickly. So we did look at a more severe, not the most severe scenario, but a moderate severe, if that's the right way to describe it, future climate scenario. Did I answer your question, or did I just wander around quite a bit?
No, you did. You have to
Okay.
explain it a little bit further. Yeah, I was just sort of asking more for a little further explanation of how climate change was applied to your modeling. So
once the next step then is, once we figured out what the precipitation was going to be, then we adjusted future pumping in correspondence to what that precipitation was going to be. And then that was used by United in the modeling process to estimate what water levels would be. So it's kind of a 3-step process to get to the information. And it's those future water levels that drove a lot of the analyses when we're talking about future sustainable conditions.
Right.
And Director Villaseñor, we also spent quite a bit of time coordinating with our upstream basin. So, as Patrick was saying a while ago, that difference between 2011 and 2015 water levels was most severe on the east end of the Piru Basin. So it was very important for us to make sure that our period of record, our future assumptions, that we understood those very well. So there were also several coordination meetings with the folks in the Santa Clarita area to make sure that we were all, at least for our first plans, on the same page and analyzing the same type of thing. So so we could we could have the best chance of having realistic information to analyze.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate knowing that you did the the legwork back there to really get that clearest picture that we can see, right? In the future, but like you said, the modeling, you worked to with other agencies to get the best that you can and to really ask those questions. So I appreciate it.
Surely.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from any of our stakeholders or directors? Either by chat or by raising your hand. I'll give it another minute for people to absorb and perhaps formulate their thoughts.
Lisa, could you please put in the chat box where someone can put their comments? So you had mentioned earlier in regards to the website that there's a form or you can send your comments there. Could you make sure we do that before we end today? Or if you're going to show them on your screen, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I was actually going to do that next, and maybe we'll do that. And if anybody comes up with any questions while I'm doing that, I'll check back in. Thank you, Chairline. So Tony, if you stop sharing your screen, I'll share the website.
Okay.
Okay, you guys should be able to see the website here. So basically what you would do is, this is the home page. You would go to the Groundwater Sustainability Plan tab and then scroll down to Public Review and Comments. And if you haven't already seen, here's where the actual documents are. Here and here. Okay, all right, my internet is cooperating, good sign. Okay, so on this page, we have some guidelines at the top. We've got the end dates for the public review period for each of the documents. The Fillmore draft GSP comment period will close on October 9th. The PIRU draft GSP public comment period will close on October 23rd. As we mentioned, we prefer to receive comments in written form via the website comment form, which I'll be scrolling down to in a moment. Just a note that it might help for you to prepare your comments in a Word file and then upload them. This way, if you get something happens in the middle, you haven't lost all of your comments. You can also send a comment letter if you prefer to Eva Ibarra at United Water, and her email address is right here. Eva, if you want, you could put it in the chat box too. And finally, if anybody would like to mail their comment letter in, here's the address. We just ask that you make sure you mail it in time so that we receive it by the end of the comment period. We've offered a few suggested guidelines just to help make sure that we can respond to your comment fully. So in each comment, please make sure to identify which GSP your comment pertains to, the section, page, and we even have line numbers in the document. And just making sure that your comment is, clear and specific in what you're trying to express. And that we appreciate constructive comments if there's something you feel isn't appropriate or where you want it to be. If you have any suggestions on how we could improve that, we would definitely appreciate that. Okay, so here's the actual comment form. So you would just basically fill your name in, and I'll do a little test here. You would put your email address, and then you put your phone. I won't give you my phone number. Then whether or not you'd like to be added to the mailing list. We won't use the email address, for anything other than the comment form questions. But if you check that you'd like to be added to the mailing list, we will do that. Optional information is just to let us know what your groundwater use or interest is, and there's just a pull down menu for that. If you'd like to let us know what organization you're with, we invite you to do that. And then you need to kind of scroll past this little section here and click down to add a comment. So here's where you select which document and which section and the page number, line number, and then, fill your comment in. And then you would just, then you just click add comment. And then you'll see that your comments will show up in this box here. Now, very important is that when you finish placing all your comments in, and you'll notice that you can add more than one comment at a time. It's just very important that you click the submit button. That will make sure that your comment is actually submitted and that we receive it. So I'll stop sharing on that and see if anybody has any questions on how to submit a comment, or if anybody has any further questions on the document or presentation before we open up for formal, oral comments on the document. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody with a comment or question. So what I'd like to do now is to open it up if anybody wants to submit their comment by speaking it right now during the meeting, and we will be recording it and we'll be noting it down. And this is the time at which the comments made will be responded to in the final GSP.
And Lisa, there's also another stakeholder engagement, correct? We have that on September 23rd from 5 to 7.
Yes, I'm going to go through next steps. We'll get through this, but I'll review that while people are perhaps formulating some comments. So as Chair Long just mentioned, we have a second workshop. That'll be September 23rd at 5 p.m. It'll be the first item of the GSA board meeting. The content will be the same presentation. So there's nothing different than what we presented today. We already went over the due dates for the comment forms. And then Tony Morgan mentioned the schedule going forward, a draft final GSP will be presented to the board for its consideration at the November board meeting, I believe. And then at the December board meeting, the board will adopt the GSP and then submit it to DWR thereafter. So we were going to have a technical session for any comments that we weren't able to, or questions we weren't able to address previously. Oh, here we go. Brian, see a comment from you.
Good morning. Can you hear me, Lisa?
Yeah, and just if you could clarify if this is a question that you're asking or if this is a formal comment you want to submit, because we kind of mixed them all together.
Well, it's a comment. I don't know if it's formal or not, but I'm speaking on behalf of the two pumpers associations. We'll be, I think, submitting something in writing, so maybe you could view this just more as a oral preview, I guess, because I know time is of essence, and I think we want to share something with Tony and the team now so they can start thinking about it, and then we can follow up with something in writing. So first and foremost, want to thank Tony and United and everybody. You've pulled together an enormous amount of information and got it all compiled and put together and presented and written, and so obviously heroic effort and great job on that. I think what we're looking at and we're continuing to look at in some more detail are in particular the written description of the SMCs particularly in the text of the GSP. This agency has put in a considerable amount of effort at the staff, consultant, and board level, working through the SMCs, probably more so than a lot of GSAs. And what really jumped out at me in reading the text of the GSP is that the text doesn't, I think, do justice to all the great work that everybody's done. And so we're going to try and help point out some areas where we think more detail, more explanation can be provided. I don't think that it's the case that any more work needs to be done. I think that we can just do more to explain the great policymaking process that this agency went through and provide the reviewers at DWR and the stakeholders who may be less engaged with just more information about how we came to the policies that ended up in this GSP. So that's just the overarching theme. We'll reach out to you in writing and perhaps maybe we can sit down and talk in more detail about some of these areas. But this comment just comes from a place of trying to make the GSP as robust as we can. And so thank you for the opportunity to share that. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Anybody else? Our last call on questions, comments on the document, comments on the process. Director McFadden.
One quick comment I'd like to make is looking over the list of participants, I see that some of the local stakeholders who are involved today have been involved in the process all the way along from the very beginning. And I just wanted to say how much we appreciate their time and effort. And I think we're not getting a whole lot of comments from some of them because they know it as well as we do. They've been involved so much. So just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you. Yes, for most of you, this is not the first time that you're hearing this information or seeing it presented. So that was the goal. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chair Long for some closing remarks.
Lisa and Tony Emmerich and just the team, Tony Morgan. There's just been a huge process, and I agree with Brian Bondi. We have done so much for this basin for so long, and really appreciate highlighting that. I think that's extremely important, especially for those in the state that really don't haven't experienced how special Fillmore and Piru, our area is in Ventura County. So I always appreciate highlighting more of that information. And I just want to appreciate the directors here today for your commitment to ensure that we're listening to all stakeholders. That is really a key directive from all of us that we agree on. Yes, please spread the word. September 23rd from 5 to 7 is our next Zoom workshop. And then we also have our board meeting October 21st, 5 to 7 p.m. too. So there's lots of opportunities. Please submit your comments. We are listening, and we want to hear from you. So I really do appreciate that. And Lisa, well done. Thank you so much. Your thoughtfulness to just pause and to make sure that we're obtaining everyone's information is very helpful. I think I need to do that more sometimes. I rush through things. So with that, if there's anyone else I haven't thanked, please, thank you, thank you, thank you. And this ends our workshop, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Good job, Lisa.
Thank you.
Always takes me a while to find the leave button.
I'm sorry?
Always takes me a minute to find the leave meeting button.
I know, we all have that.
See you next week.
Yeah, might be able
Good job, Lisa.
Right, good job, Eva.
That's good.
I mean, I get confused. I see Eva, and then I see Chris Softly at the bottom of the at the bottom of the meeting. All right, we'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Well, that was a lot more peaceful than
we anticipated, huh?
I thought that